When buying windsurfing gear, especially as a beginner or even as an intermediate, there are a few common mistakes that I see people making all the time that can cost you time, money and lead to a lot of frustration. Even when I started out more than 10 years ago now, in retrospect, I bought a lot of gear that was maybe not optimal for my progression in windsurfing, and I think I could have progressed much quicker on the right gear. In this video we're going to go over what to look for when buying new gear that is right for your level and also local conditions, so you can enjoy the sport to the fullest and also make progress really quick. Hi, my name is Nils and on this channel we talk about everything windsurfing related. So if you're new here, you can join the community by subscribing down below, and honestly it will also really help out this channel as well. Thank you guys. The first mistake that I see happening quite frequently is going for gear that is too advanced for your level, and I'm guilty of that myself. I basically straight up bought slalom gear, but this is not the best thing to do. You're much better off with going for freeride gear or even beginner gear, because these boards will function really well in most conditions. They are not so hard to ride, the foot strap positions are further inboard, and all of these things make for an easier and nicer ride. And guys, if you have an easier ride, you will be able to stay on the water for longer, practice the moves, like for example, let's say a jibe, for longer because you're not getting exhausted so quickly, and everything will just come more naturally. And I guess the media in windsurfing has a lot to do with this, because I think what mainly the brands are promoting is kind of the high-end stuff. You see, for example, the crazy waves being ripped in Hokipa, or you see the slalom guys flying at 60-70 kilometers. But that's really not the best equipment to learn on or even to progress on. The second mistake that I see happening quite frequently is that people kind of ignore their local conditions. For example, you might be located somewhere where it's like very low wind, and most of the time you have only like bump and jump conditions or flat water. So in this case you have to look at like what is kind of my average wind and wave conditions at my spot, and then buy gear that is suited for these kind of conditions. Let's say you have a spot where it's like relatively flat but super light wind. So you might want to go with a little bit bigger board so you're able to plane earlier and get more time on the water. Or you might have a spot that's actually super challenging. Most of the times you have rough conditions and you have strong winds, and then you want a board that is relatively forgiving and where you will not feel every piece of chop. So in this case maybe something more into like a free wave category. So guys, when you're deciding what to buy, you should look at where you're probably most likely going to sail. And that includes basically your home spot or where you might want to take this gear on for vacation. And then make your choice of what to buy depending on these kind of prevailing conditions that you have. The third mistake when buying windsurfing gear is to go for too low board volume. So board volume, the lower you go, the kind of faster and more responsive the gear is, but the harder it will also be to stay afloat and kind of handle the gear. On the other side, if you're going for too much board volume, the board will feel sluggish, unresponsive or slow, and at a certain point this will also hinder your progress. And a basic rule of thumb here is, if you're a beginner, I would go for a board with the volume of your body weight plus around 50 liters. So in my case, I'm 92 kilos. If I was a beginner, I would go for something like in the 140 to 150 liter range. Then if you're like more an intermediate, you can go for a little bit less volume. Then I would say, of course, this is if you just like want one board that is covering the most, then I would go with a board of your body weight plus around 20 liters. So in my case, 92 plus 20 is 112, something in this range. And this would be a good board to cover the biggest range for myself. Mismatching mast is a really big topic, and this question basically comes every day in the conversations with customers, because there's so many different brands with so many different masts and sails out there. So the most common question that I get asked basically every day is like, does this mast that I have from brand X from, I don't know, year 2018 fit with your sail from this year? So the thing is, guys, you can have basically the best sail in the world, but if you're matching it with the wrong mast that has the wrong bend curve, then it will not work. And to give you guys a quick overview, there's basically three kinds of mast curves out there in windsurfing. So we have hard top, constant curve and flex top. Luckily these days most brands are going with constant curve masts. So in most cases, if you have a constant curve mast and want to fit it with a constant curve sail, it will somewhat fit. Of course the masts are not completely identical, so you're always better off with buying the mast from the brand where you also bought the sail, because then you can be 100% sure that it will fit. And one thing, because I get asked this question so many times, no one can tell you 100% if this mast is going to fit, because, I mean, just make the calculation. You have maybe 30 brands that are selling windsurfing gear, and they produce new masts every year for like 20 sail lines, and then no one is going to know from the brand if like these thousands of different masts are working with the sail 100% optimally, or maybe only 85 to 90% optimally. So if you're using a mast from another brand, ask your friends, ask people on the beach if they have any experience with this. You can be lucky and someone tried it already, but most of the times it's just a try and error thing, and you just have to test it, rig the sail with this mast, and then see how the sail is opening up, how the belly looks, all this kind of stuff. But my tip really is, if you can somehow get the original mast from the brand where you bought the sail, you can be 100% sure that everything is working as intended and you will not run into any problems. Always changing gear can be an issue. And I know, we all love to have the shiny new gear, the latest model, but honestly, you don't really need that. When you buy a good rig and board that is fitting for your style and what you're doing, you don't need to change every year. The boards and rigs, from most brands at least, are built to last for multiple years. And if you're changing around too much and buying every year different gear, and let's say you're not just changing like from a free race to a free race sail, but you're like also changing like kind of the discipline or what the sail and board is aimed for, you will make it hard on yourself, because everything out there rides a little bit differently. So if you're sticking for a few years with your setup and progress as much as you can on this setup, you will learn a lot. If you're changing around all the time, you always need to kind of spend your energy on learning this new equipment, which will cost you time and energy. So once you find something that fits for you, I would advise to stick with that. Of course, if you find out for yourself that you're riding something that is kind of mismatching what we talked about earlier, like for example, it's not matching your conditions at your home spot, of course, yeah, then you probably should change gear. But if the gear is fitting and you're happy with it, I would advise to progress as much on this gear as you can before maybe upgrading to a gear that's like one level above. So let's say that you're riding on free race gear and you kind of have the feeling you want a little bit more speed, so you're going for the slalom gear. But my advice would really be, get the most out of the equipment that you have first, try to perfect the power jibe, the water start, all the stuff on the free race gear, and only when you have the feeling that the gear that you have currently is limiting you, like you feel you reach the top speed of this board a couple of times and you want something that is just going this little bit faster, yeah, then it makes sense to change. But if you reached only 80% of the potential of this gear, maybe try to get the most out of it before upgrading. And of course, this will also save you money in the long run. This aspect actually gets neglected a lot, and I think a lot of people underestimate how big of an influence fins have on the boards. It's not just the case for slalom riders, where it is especially important. Everyone can benefit from buying a good fin. And I see this kind of happening also a lot, that people buy a board and they spend a lot of money on the board and then they save on the fin. And in my experience, the fin is like 50% of the performance of that board. Saving on the fin, in my opinion, is really the wrong point where to save money if you're buying gear. A good fin should make the board feel free, avoid having spin outs, make it easy to point upwind, and also not overpower the board on a downwind course. And there's also a good rule of thumb here to determine the length of the fin, and that is basically you take the width of your board, divide it by half, and then add around 2 to 3 centimeters, and this in most cases is a good estimation of the length of fin you need for your board. And with this rule of thumb you can determine if you have maybe a too short or too long fin for your board. Then what's also super important in fins is the stiffness. And a softer fin will generally make the board feel more free, but can also overpower the board. A harder fin is generally more suited to heavier riders who can overpower softer fins. Of course, there's a lot of other characteristics that determine a good fin. For example, is it made out of G10 or is it made out of carbon? There are good G10 fins out there, but also with carbon you can control much better in which way the fin is flexing. So you can make it stiff in the direction where you don't want it to flex, and you can make it softer in the direction where you want some flex. The next mistake when buying windsurfing gear is not thinking about future progression. And I know this can sound kind of confusing if you compare it with one of the previous tips where I said don't go with gear that is too advanced for your level. But what I mean by thinking about future progression is that you don't go with gear, especially in the beginning phases of your windsurfing journey, that is too specialized. So there are several kinds of disciplines in windsurfing, for example, freestyle, wave, slalom, all these kind of disciplines, and there's gear that is specially suited to each of those. So in the beginning, I would choose gear that is kind of suited to the biggest variety of conditions and allows also for more progression. And gear that is specially suited towards this, in my opinion at least, is freeride and free race gear. Because on this kind of gear, everyone can learn the quickest in the kind of intermediate phases of the sport. And what I'm mainly talking about here is like doing a good jibe, water starting, riding in the harness, riding in the foot straps, all this stuff you want to do on freeride gear, and then as you progress go into free race gear. And these boards will allow you to have fun on them for a long time and progress at a really good rate. So the last mistake, and this is kind of an obvious one, is not asking for advice. And what I mean by this is that if we look at our kind of consumer shopping behavior, however you want to call it, it goes more and more towards buying online. And then you have all these fancy products on the shop or brand sites and you want to buy something. And I think it's a big mistake if you don't previously ask for advice what you should buy. Because then you might end up with something that is not really suited towards you, or that is maybe highly specialized, but it is not written on the product description. So especially in windsurfing, with so many different products and so many different niches inside of windsurfing, I would always ask for advice first, because most people, whether it's in the shop or at the brands, can help you a lot and ask you the right questions to determine what gear is actually best suited towards you. And on that note, you can actually also write to me. I set up a contact email right here. And if you have any questions about the right gear for you, feel free to write me there. And I'm happy to help you out there so that you can make the right choice of what gear might be good for you. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope you found some useful advice in this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Thanks to my sponsors and also Patreons, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.